Joining me right now is former Whitewater independent counsel and former federal prosecutor Robert Ray. Robert, it's good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning.
What are Manafort's options now, and what is your reaction to 80 years potentially in prison?
Well, let's be careful about that. I mean, he's not going to get an 80-year sentence.
Okay.
That's the maximum possible sentence. If you combined all of the counts and you ran them consecutively under the sentencing guidelines, he will get a substantial amount of prison time because of the fact that the loss figure, the amount involved, the amount of money involved, will largely drive what the sentence will be. So it will be substantial, and that's a powerful incentive to cooperate if he has something to offer. Whether he has something to offer or not, I mean, nobody knows. We don't know, and presumably Bob Mueller's office is going to figure that out.
So his options at this point, cooperate or not?
Well, I think you have to look at that, and you'll have to look at it over the next several weeks because obviously he's facing another proceeding in the District of Columbia in federal court there. My guess is that rather than go to trial, if he's going to make a play to cooperate with Bob Mueller's office, it'll happen between now and the start of that trial.
Does the Paul Manafort verdict mean anything for President Trump?
Well, I mean, as far as what we know, maybe not, because there's no evidence of collusion that has been derived out of all of this. I mean, that was a straight financial case. The jury was able to reach a verdict largely with regard to the financial crimes that Paul Manafort committed himself.
Right,
tax
and years
fraud.
ago, before he ever was involved with Donald Trump.
Right, so, it's a little hard to see, like, what's the relationship between the one and the other, and the president's lawyers obviously have appropriately said, what does this have to do with collusion? Well, apparently nothing at the moment, so far as we know.
Exactly. Okay, we want to get to Michael Cohen as well, because Manafort, not the only legal news from yesterday. Former Trump lawyer Michael Cohen pleaded guilty on 8 counts, including tax evasion, and told a federal judge President Trump had directed him to pay for the silence of 2 women who said they had affairs with Mr. Trump. Robert, legally, how problematic might this be for the president?
Well, just because he may have directed it, we don't know what that means exactly in terms of what that conversation was about. Remember, Michael Cohen serves as, at least at that time, Mr. Trump's lawyer. Donald Trump would have a number of defenses with regard to exactly what was going on here. Now, I would assume that Donald Trump's defense would be, whatever I did, I never told Michael Cohen to violate the law. And unless it were shown that Donald Trump willfully and knowingly violated a campaign finance law, he's not exposed. Remember also that Donald Trump is permitted to spend an unlimited amount of his own money on his campaign. What he can't do, obviously, is be involved in a conspiracy with somebody else in order to have that person making a legal campaign contribution which would exceed the limit for an individual, and also would be a problem because it was run through a corporation. But you'd have to show that Donald Trump knew all those things, and it's not clear, even if there was a direction by Mr. Trump, then Mr. Trump, before he became president, in October of an election year, as to exactly what the instructions were and what he knew about that. And I think the John Edwards prosecution, which was unsuccessful, shows in many respects how difficult it is to prove a campaign violation by the candidate.
Can you really make that reach, though, that it is a campaign violation? He was paying women to get silence about an affair. Do you connect the dots and say, yeah, that could be campaign finance?
Well, and it could also be explained by other innocent reasons, not the least of which he probably didn't want his wife to know about it, not unlike the defense that John Edwards had in the campaign finance case where he went to trial. Also, be careful about taking too much away from somebody who pleads guilty in an unrelated case, who doesn't, in fact, himself challenge the government's evidence. And also, there were other things that the government had against him, and I'm sure they said to him, look, we've got you with regard to tax-related charges, but we also have you with regard to this, and we're not going to let you plead guilty unless you plead guilty to this campaign finance violation, which I'm sure is the position the U.S. Attorney's Office took in New York. Now, that's an untested allegation, right? I mean, he is admitting to it under oath, but what, if anything, he's able to say with regard to the president's involvement, other than just what was said in court, which is the direction, whatever that means, obviously would be subject to, dispute, and it wouldn't necessarily equate with and be, equivalent to returning a charge against a president, whether a sitting president or the president once he left office, in connection with a campaign campaign finance violation and felony.
Look, the president has called the special counsel investigation a witch hunt. Give us a sense of how you see this. I mean, the Robert Mueller investigation started off as collusion with Russia. There was no evidence of that. Then they moved to obstruction. Now we're talking about, a porn star and paying the porn star. This has gone off the rails. I don't think anybody can
I don't think anybody really,
that.
if you're dispassionate about this and not involved in the mix, the hyperventilating by the opposition party about, trying to take down a president, if you looked at this dispassionately, I do not believe that Bob Mueller is positioned to bring a federal felony campaign finance violation against a sitting president. I don't think that's ever going to happen. Now, this may be the subject of information that is disclosed in a report that Bob Mueller submits to Rod Rosenstein at the end of this investigation, and ultimately that would be sent on to Congress and released to the public. It might be the subject, obviously, of some consideration, depending on in whose hands the House of Representatives is, about an impeachment inquiry. But we're a long way away from that. And also, again, going back to the evidence, just because Mr. Trump's lawyer says that he was directed by the candidate to do this doesn't mean that Donald Trump was complicit, knowingly complicit in a federal felony. And all this talk yesterday about, well, this proves that, Donald Trump was involved in a conspiracy to violate the law, I think that's well short of the mark. I mean, that would, we have a long way to go, and a prosecutor would have a long way to go before, such a case would ever be brought.
Yeah, certainly.
Now, I mean, to go to your other question about the origins of the investigation, I think the president has made a legitimate point. So far as we know, that is not something that Bob Mueller's office is looking at. But what we do know is that Michael Horowitz, the Inspector General for the Department of Justice, at least in the first instance, is looking at it. There's a report expected with regard to that matter.
Yeah.
And I imagine that once that report is issued, then Rod Rosenstein has another decision to make, which is whether or not to refer whatever may be a part of that investigation and whatever recommendations Michael Horowitz may make in that as a result of the issuance of that report, to decide whether or not those matters should be referred to the special counsel for further investigation.
I've said it many times, and I'll say it again, and that is, I can't see the American people, the public, seeing any credibility from the special counsel's investigation if he is not looking at everything that occurred with regard to Russia in 2016. That includes the Hillary Clinton paid-for dossier, which was used to get a FISA warrant to wiretap an American citizen.
And everything about that, I think what you're suggesting is that that's the sort of the fundamental principle of fairness, right? And I think the American people have a right to expect, on a bipartisan basis, that the investigation will be thorough on both sides.
Exactly.
And that appropriate findings and conclusions can be made with regard to the entirety of the matter, and then submit that to Congress, and then let the people's elected representatives decide what, if anything, they want to do about it.
You would think. You would think. So we'll see about that.
I still think this is just a part of the story, despite what the New York Times and Vanity Fair and all the usual suspects want to make of this.
Right.
This is only part of the story. It does show, though, despite all of their criticism previously to the contrary, the president has allowed this process to work. This is only part of the story. There's much more to come. If fairness is going to dictate ultimately what we decide to do here, the whole thing will be investigated, and then we'll figure out where we are.
And you hope that's where we're going in terms of fairness.
I think the country's capable of doing that, yes.
All right, we'll talk with you along the way for sure. Robert, great insights as always.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Robert Ray joining us there.